What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? After more than 150 conversations with executives from companies like Disney, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, I've learned that sports is a common denominator. Some of our guests' athletic experiences earned them a place in their sports Hall of Fame, like Chick-fil-A Chairman Dan Cathy. Some hung up their cleats after high school, like Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, while others, like Condoleezza Rice, claim they weren't that great in their sport. But no matter their skill level, they have all told me that being a part of a team taught them leadership lessons that they still use today. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, I'm your host, Don Yeager, here to give you an all-access pass to genuine, authentic, fireside chat-like conversations with today's business icons so that you can create powerful change in your organization. This is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Bob McDonald. I'm so excited to have him with us today. He is incredible. You're going to love him. Bob's 33 years working for Procter & Gamble culminated in his role as chairman, president, and CEO. Under his leadership, P&G added nearly 1 billion people to its global customer base, and its stock price increased by 60% in his 4 years as CEO. Following his career at P&G, Bob was selected by President Obama to head the Department of Veterans Affairs. And while at the helm of the VA, he was able to help transform the agency into one that truly delivered better care for our military veterans. Bob is personally and professionally committed to values-based leadership and is one of the smartest men I've ever met. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in the top 2% of his class. Remember to visit corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes for our downloadable PDF customized to today's conversation. It is perfect for those looking to apply today's valuable lessons into their leadership practice.
Trust comes from intimacy, and the leaders got to build that intimacy. The only way to rebuild trust is to get out there and be the face of the organization. It's easy to discredit an organization that is a monolithic bureaucracy. It's harder to discredit an organization that is Bob McDonald, West Point graduate, opening up their heart and saying, I'm here to care for you. I care about you. Here's my phone number.
Bob, thanks for joining us.
Oh, Don, it's great to be with you, and I sure appreciate all you do. I have such fond memories of our times together at West Point.
I want to start there because what you do there is so fantastic. I first met you a number of years ago when I got a chance to be part of your faculty for your McDonald Conference for Leaders of Character. You bring in a diverse group of top undergraduate students from around the world. Big investment of your time, your money. Why do you do it?
That's a great question, Don. Particularly moving around the world with Procter & Gamble in business, my wife and I realized that the really knotty problems of this world can't be solved by any one leader or any one country. They need us all working together. What better thing to do than to get students who have been nominated by their university presidents, the best universities in the world, get them together at West Point and use the West Point Behavioral Science and Leadership Department to give them a transformational experience so we can all get focused on what kind of leadership is required to solve these problems. We've probably touched the lives of over 600 students. We're in our 12th year this year. It's really exciting. It certainly has changed my life. You see the sense of purpose great leaders have at the event. I invited Mr. G, chairman of the board of Beijing Huayan, one of the largest retailers in China. He said to me, you know, what I find so remarkable is that these young people who are college students already know what their purpose is in life and already know where they're headed. That sense of purpose then becomes the thread of continuity through someone's life. West Point is the preeminent leadership institution in the world, we believe, but we don't just create leaders, we create leaders of character. And I think that's an important distinction because a leader of character is one who puts the needs of the organization above themselves. A leader of character is one who has such a sense of integrity that they follow the West Point honor code. I won't lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do.
Yeah.
Those are really essential components of character.
That last little phrase, nor tolerate those who do. It's one thing to say, I won't do these things. It's another to say straight up, if I know that someone around me is engaged in those things, I'm going to make sure I step in to stop that as well. That's one of the great misses in so many leadership roles today. People are like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to close my ears.
You touched on it in your book, great teams. When you think of a great team, they have a common culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough for the individual to say, I'm not going to do it, but you've got to create a culture where that behavior is unacceptable in that culture. As I go around the world with Procter & Gamble, and we operate in 200 countries around the world, if I go into a factory and I see a piece of paper on the floor, worse, I see people walking by that piece of paper, I know that the standards in that operation aren't high enough. Mm. Or you go into the bathroom, the restroom, and the question is, do the individuals dry the space around the sink when they leave because they're concerned about who may follow them? Or do they just settle for allowing it to be the way it is? It's all about standards. It's about community. It's about culture.
Wow. That starts at the top.
Yes.
That starts with you walking by and picking that piece of paper up and suddenly everybody going, whoa.
Absolutely. And as a leader, you almost have to look for those opportunities to create those kinds of cultural messages for the organization because word does get around.
Right.
And some are accidental and some are deliberate. And of course, as a leader, the larger the organization you lead, the more deliberate you need to be. I was dealing with one of our leaders. He was running Procter & Gamble Latin America at the time. In the military, and oftentimes in other leadership experiences, you're told to praise in public and criticize in private. That's a very common phrase. And what I discovered as I reviewed this individual's 360-degree feedback was people thought this person was accepting of lower standards. And the reason was because he was criticizing in private, not in public. No, you've got to criticize publicly when the behavior is such a violation of your standards, or people will think you're accepting of that mediocre behavior.
Wow. Criticize publicly if the behavior is so off key.
Yeah, especially in the military where lives are in danger, you've got to expunge that behavior immediately.
Right.
Don't criticize the person, criticize the behavior.
Right, the behavior. You know, grew up in Gary, Indiana, right outside of Chicago.
Correct.
One of the things I love about your story, you started applying to West Point at 11 years old. Had you ever even been to West Point?
Actually, no, I'd never been to West Point. In fact, I did not go to West Point for the first time until the day before I was sworn in.
Wow.
There was a TV program called The West Point Story, and I wanted to lead a somewhat differentiated life. I wanted to make a difference, and I thought that going to West Point was the way to do that. And my father had served in the Army Air Force after World War II. He was in the occupation forces in Japan. He had spent maybe 18 months in the military. So I didn't have any military presence, but I thought that that was the way to make a difference. I actually applied to West Point after we had moved to the northwest suburbs of Chicago, Arlington Heights, Illinois. And my guidance counselor in high school said, well, Bob, don't even apply to West Point. You can't get in. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, I was doing pretty well academics and leadership and athletics. And she said, no, you need to be politically connected. Gee, I went home that night and I talked to my mom and dad and I said, we're not politically connected. I've got to get my member of Congress to nominate me. So my parents, terrific parents, I mean, just great childhood, said, well, let's start going to their fundraisers. We didn't have any money to give them, but we would go to the fundraisers and I would barge in the door and run up to the member of Congress and explain who I was and said, you've got this big file on me that you've had for a while. The member of Congress that I kept applying to that kept encouraging me and never said no was Don Rumsfeld.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't get nominated by Don because Don went to be the chief of staff in the White House.
Right.
Phil Crane replaced him. So Phil Crane actually nominated me. But those 6 years, from sixth grade to 12th grade, 5 of them were with Don Rumsfeld. When I became secretary of the VA and went to things like the Alfalfa Club and other events, I would run into Secretary Rumsfeld. And I pulled him aside and I told him, I said, you taught me a life lesson, which is never discourage a young person, always encourage a young person. He did that. I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to follow his example because Secretary Rumsfeld was just incredible in terms of encouraging me.
What a gift.
Yes.
The West Point Cadet Prayer has a line within it that you've made important to your leadership style. Choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong.
Right.
Talk to me about that.
You're right. It's of all the parts of the West Point Cadet Prayer, it's the one that animates my life and the one that I share with groups more frequently than any other.
Mm.
It's analogous to not walking by the piece of paper or not leaving the sink wet, having incredibly high standards. In business in particular and in organizations, things never go generally desperately wrong from the beginning. If you read the story of Enron, they didn't set out to become the corrupt organization that they ended up being. When we were acquiring the Gillette company in 2005, Jim Kiltz was leading the company. He was the CEO at Gillette. And we were talking to him, and Jim said, what happened at Gillette was 1 month they weren't making their shipping estimate, the amount of products sold. So they put a discount on the product at the end of the month. The next month was even worse. So they put a discount on it the third week of the month. Then the next month, it was even worse. They put a discount on it the second week of the month. And eventually, they ended up discounting the product from the beginning of the month.
Right.
Basically, what would happen is people would either hold their orders till the very end of the month to make sure they got the best discount, or everything was discounted.
Yeah.
Jim basically said that's what happens in organizations. You don't start out at the end. You don't start out meaning to be there, but you keep incrementally getting there. And it's analogous to the honor code. When you lie once, it becomes easier to lie again. When you behave without character once, it becomes easier to do. It's having the habit, and I know you mentioned habits a lot in your book, to never face that choice. Obviously, Jim pulled the Band-Aid off quickly, which upset all of his customers and also upset his shareholders. That's a tough thing to do as a CEO.
It is when you start getting into publicly traded companies where you have so many constituencies that you have to deal with. You managed all of that. After your time in the service, you go to work at P&G. You're there for 33 years. Pretty incredible. You rise to chairman, president, CEO. But one of the interviews I read, you said that one lesson you took from your leadership was that you won't find a good customer service organization that's rule-based. Today, we have to have rules, and rules allow people not to have to develop the very culture and character that we're talking about because they can lean into the rules instead of just doing what's right.
That's right.
Customer service is important in every company. It should be.
Right.
So how do we develop a customer service organization that is not rule-based?
This idea comes from some of the total quality work of Dr. Edwards Deming. I had the thrill of taking total quality from him in about 1983 or so. And in total quality thinking, there's something called the Kano model, which is a Japanese term. Basically, what delights the customer today will become accepted tomorrow.
Mm.
When I was young, growing up in Gary, Indiana, my mom would say, only the rich people had electronic windows on their car. We're okay with roll-up windows. Only the rich people have central air conditioning. We're okay with window units or with no air conditioning at all.
Right.
In a customer service environment, what you do to delight the customer today will not delight them tomorrow. And so what you have to do is you have to create an organization of employees who are working every single day to figure out how to delight that customer in new ways. It's one of the reasons, Don, I use an inverted pyramid to describe the organization I wanted at the Department of Veterans Affairs. The secretary's on the bottom at the pinnacle, not on the top. And across the top, you've got the frontline employees who are interfacing with the customer, the veteran, and need to be exalted as they try to make a difference in that customer's life. I came in when the previous secretary had resigned and the organization was in crisis. What's normal in an organization that's in crisis, the organization tends to turn inward. I had to get them to turn outward. So we had to juxtapose what rule based looks like versus principle based. Rule based, we had an unfortunate situation in Spokane, Washington, where a veteran who was disabled came to our clinic and he called our receptionist and said, I need help getting into the clinic. It was only about 10, 15 meters. And she said, unfortunately, I'm sorry, you're going to have to call 911.
Oh my gosh.
It was awful.
Yeah.
That's not the way you would treat a veteran. That's not the way you'd treat a veteran you knew. So Sloan Gibson, Deputy Secretary, sent an email to all VA employees saying, this is not the right behavior. Contrast that with the behavior in White River Junction, Vermont, where we had a mental health nurse. Her veteran didn't show up for his appointment, but she took the initiative, key word there, she took the initiative to get the VA police and the local police. They went out to his house, they broke down the door, and they found him near death, wedged under some furniture that had fallen on him, and they saved his life.
Wow.
The rule base is, where you rely on a rule to stay behind your desk, to not take initiative, and you think everything's okay. The principle based is where you take initiative, you go out and you save somebody's life. Now, if they had broken the door down and everything was all right, would we as the leader punish the individual who took the initiative, in which case we'd never get initiative from the organization again? Or would we still celebrate them for having taken the initiative?
Great question, though. What a hard question.
Well, it is a hard question. How do you deal with it? I mean, sometimes as a leader, I would purposely find people who have failed taking initiative in order to celebrate them in front of the organization. So the organization knew that psychological safety was well at the Procter & Gamble company.
Right.
I worked on some failed new products when I started with the company. In fact, Steve Case, who you may know, Steve and I started at P&G at the same time.
No kidding.
Yes.
We're interviewing him here in a couple of weeks.
We both run failed brands. Shows you that your career can still go places even if you start on a failed brand.
That's it.
I was on a failed laundry detergent and fabric conditioner. Laundry detergent is an anionic, meaning it's negatively charged particle. Fabric conditioner is cationic, meaning it's a positively charged particle. You put negative and a positive together, what do you get? You get water. So, I mean, our detergent didn't clean very well and it didn't soften very well. We did our best job ever supporting and marketing that brand, but just didn't do well.
Yeah, but you still managed to climb the ladder and create quite a career for yourself despite producing water early in your career.
Well, I was blessed. I was totally blessed. Procter & Gamble's a great company with a great culture, promote from within and start at the bottom. Here I was a captain, having just taken a battalion to the Arctic and back and had an MBA, and I went to Procter & Gamble. It was one of the lower salary officers I had, certainly the lowest title I had, and I started at the bottom. Life is a series of starting over. Life is a series of chapters. You as an individual have to have enough confidence in yourself that you're not afraid to start over. If you're afraid to start over, if you're looking for a title or a big paycheck, you may lose a huge opportunity. And certainly choosing the Procter & Gamble company was one of the largest blessings of my life after choosing my wife.
Right.
I did pretty well at West Point, but then I took off all my insignia and I went to Army Ranger School, where everybody's a Ranger candidate.
Right.
Everybody gets treated the same poor way. And then I went to the 82nd Airborne Division as a second lieutenant with a platoon sergeant who had been to Vietnam 3 times. So you can't be afraid to start over again. Some of the biggest opportunities come that way.
Boy, I love that. That's a big lesson there. So you have this incredible career at P&G, and then you retired. Life is good. You've made enough money to be comfortable forever. And the opportunity comes for you to step in to a role that I don't think you probably even imagined for yourself. as the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. How do you decide, well, I'm going to give up my life of comfort to go deal with the mess that is the VA at the time and Washington forever?
Yeah, it's okay. um, that was the easiest decision in the world, Don, because my purpose is working to improve the lives of others, whether it's Boy Scouts, church, Procter and Gamble, where our purpose is to improve the lives of the world's consumers. And any given day, 5 billion people on the planet are using at least one P&G product. The Army, making the world safe for democracy. It was an easy decision because I had brothers and sisters I had served with who needed help. And the brilliance of President Obama was deciding that he wanted somebody who had run a large business. Procter and Gamble company at the time was maybe Fortune 20, and he wanted somebody who was a veteran. The intersection of that Venn diagram,
You weren't competing with dozens of people, I'm sure.
I don't even know, but credit to him for recognizing that, because if the VA were on the Fortune 500, it would be like number 9.
Wow.
400,000 people and $300 billion in funding.
Wow. So you're in this new chapter of your life,
Starting over again. Yeah.
right? Starting over again. But you did have a fun experience, one that I read about that I thought was really funny, where you get a chance to meet the Pope.
Yes. I had many of these kind of pinch me moments. Pope Francis had a visit to the United States, so I had the opportunity to participate. There was a translator because, of course, the Pope speaks primarily Spanish. When I was going through the receiving line, President Obama described me as the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And you could tell they were struggling with what that was. And it suddenly dawned on me, we're the only country in the world with a Department of Veterans Affairs.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, in Great Britain, for example, the VA work is done in the Department of Defense. I've been to Ukraine to help them set up a Department of Veterans Affairs, which they didn't have. So people don't necessarily have it. So you could see he was struggling with this definition. And of course, the United States has been in many wars, and the Department of Veterans Affairs has developed over time. President Obama is a smart guy. He saw this and he said, well, you may know him more from being the CEO of the company Procter and Gamble that makes Pampers.
Right.
Pampers resonated right away with the Pope. I think the Pope likes babies. He knew immediately what that was. And of course, Procter and Gamble has a large presence in Argentina, so I'm sure he was familiar.
That's funny. For all the credentials, you get Pampers. That's awesome.
That's okay. Being the grandfather of 6, I've changed many Pampers.
You changed a few. So while you were at the VA, one thing you did really stood out to me. In your effort to offer up accountability, you made your cell phone publicly available. You told veterans and others, here's my number. That's bold. Nobody does that.
You're right. I did that at my first national press conference. I think it was in October or September of 2014. And the Washington Post published it.
Yeah.
And then it was on the internet. Don, that's still my phone number. And I still get calls from veterans. I had to let veterans know that I cared so much about them that I would give out my phone number as, in essence, the contact of last resort. If nothing else works, if it doesn't work at your current VA, call McDonald and see what he can get done. There's a lady by the name of Debbie Bevan. She still works for the secretary. She stood up a whole team of people who would help me answer these questions and problems that we got because I would answer the phone. Actually, when I left office as a gift, they gave me a silver engraved telephone holder. It said, keep answering the phone or something. But there was a weekend where I got a call. Excuse me, it kind of chokes me up thinking about it, but from a veteran who wanted to take their life. And
they called your cell phone.
Yes. I called Debbie. We called our suicide prevention. They intervened and the veteran's alive today. So you never know. I'm always anxious. So that's why I haven't changed the phone number and I still answer it today.
You did that because you were trying to send a message, but it wasn't just to veterans. I would assume it was also to the 400,000 who worked for you.
Great point. when I got to the VA, some IT person came in my office and said, "Good news. We figured out how to create some email addresses for you that nobody will figure out. Here's your cell phone." No, no, no. I've got to be accessible. I'm working with an organization called the Partnership for Public Service. It's run by a great guy named Max Steyer. We're trying to teach the same kind of human centered design, principle based leadership, customer service orientation that the VA is now known for to the other departments of government, because every government organization should be that way, should be accessible. Isn't that why we're citizens and why we pay taxes?
In your time, have you ever seen another secretary, another leader do what you did there?
No, but I'm encouraged. I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. I was the first one to set up something called the Chief Veteran Experience Officer. I hired a guy named Tom Allen, who had been the CEO for Jollibee and a top leader at McDonald's, who knew human centered design. And together we transformed the veteran experience. I would say there are now 5 departments of federal government that have chief experience officers, including the IRS, including Social Security. And I'm just thrilled by that.
Yeah.
Leaders got to be accessible. In a crisis, the leaders got to be even more accessible. It reminds me of feedback. If I go into a room where I'm speaking to a large group and I say, "Everybody raise your hand if you're giving sufficient feedback to your subordinate," every hand in the room goes up. And then I say, "Okay, how many of you are getting sufficient feedback from your boss?" And every hand stays down. So I don't care how accessible you are, you're not accessible enough. We as leaders need to set up systems and a culture to be more and more accessible. I know that's not popular,
Mm.
but I got this award from the American Chamber of Commerce, and my speech was, "I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. And I'm not going to be done till the day I die." When I introduced President Obama in Arlington National Cemetery in Veterans Day, November 11th, 2016, it was our last time there while in office. I always think back to that closing scene of Saving Private Ryan, that terrific Tom Hanks movie where Captain Miller had given his life to save the life of Matt Damon. And you got an aged Matt Damon standing there in Omaha Cemetery above the beaches, which a most humbling place. And he turns to his family and says, "Tell me that I've earned it." I get choked, "Tell me that I've earned it."
Mm.
I've lost friends that I've gone to West Point with. I've seen bad things, and tell me that I've earned it. And I wish every American would think about that. It's important. I think we behave differently if we were trying to earn what all of our forefathers and foremothers have given us.
Sacrificed for. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of organizations that use the word teams to talk about their organization, but most of them are really actually just a group of individuals carrying the same business card. They're not really a team. You've been on teams, you've built teams, you've constructed them at every level. If you were counseling one of us on how to build a team from a group of disparate individuals, what are some of the elements that you would coach us to understand how to take a collection of individuals and turn them into a team?
Get them a copy of Don Yeager's book, Great Teams.
Dude, you are like my hero. My children are like going to write you Christmas cards right now.
Well, those 16 habits are important. I used to train every single general manager at the Procter and Gamble company. We'd have new ones every year, but I would train everyone in leadership. And what I would say is, I can train you in the behaviors of leadership. Leadership, I consider the most scarce resource in the world, and arguably the most important resource in the world. So if we're not spending time training leaders, what else are we doing? And I can train you on the 5 sets of behaviors. I call them the 5 E's. Envision. Do you have a vision? What does winning look like? Engage. Have you engaged everybody in that vision? And do you have line of sight from the lowest level employee to the vision? Energize. Have you motivated people? Are you motivating people? Enable. Are you building organization capability? That E is actually the one where most people fall down. And then the last one, which may be the most important, is execute. Are you actually executing against the vision and strategies? Okay, I can train those behaviors. And as you behave that way, people look at that and say, Don's a leader. The hardest thing to train is if you don't have the love of the people. The military does a great job in training love of the people because your life's in danger. You remember General Banks, Colonel Colditz, who preceded Bernie as the head of the Department of Leadership. They write and talk a lot about in extremis leadership, leadership under extreme circumstances, like in the military where your life's in danger. Maybe there's ways to apply that back to times where your life's not in danger. And I looked at that and I said, okay, how do I create this in extremis feeling so we all love each other? Because if you love each other, it's the ultimate gift of a team. The team is where people are willing to put another person's interests above their own. That's what you see in great teams. I struggled for years trying to develop that at P&G. Of course, at the VA, it's relatively easier because people's lives are in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Get people to love each other. People know when they're on a high performance team. It's palpable.
Yeah. I get asked this all the time. When you watch any high performing team in sports, what is one of the things they say? We played for each other.
Absolutely.
I wasn't playing for a contract. I wasn't playing to make a little bit more money. I played for that person on my left or right. You only do that if you love each other.
Absolutely. It's Joe Burrow giving his box to his replacement's family without being asked.
Right.
You don't want to have to ask for these things. Again, it's back to our discussion of what delights people, what surprises people.
But once you do it, though, you got to keep doing it.
That's the hard part. Yeah.
Envision, engage, energize, enable, and execute.
Yes, sir.
I love it. You have said that the secret of life is maintaining the insatiable ability to learn.
Right.
How do you encourage others to keep that fire going? Because there do seem to be so many people that wherever they get and they think they've achieved everything they set out to achieve, now we're on cruise control. And that's cool. But that's not you.
Well, I work hard. I mean, I'm not sure I'm good at it yet, but this came to me when I was doing this general manager college at P&G, and I got some new hires together, and all the new hires were complaining about the leadership of their general managers. They don't know how to text. They don't know how to use Excel. They don't know how to do Word. They don't know this technology. They don't know that technology. They never heard of this. They never heard of that. So I purposely got a session together, all new GMs and new hires. And I put the new hires into the front of the room, and I purposely asked them to complain about the general managers in that room as a group, which they were happy to do. And then I stopped it and I said, okay, let's fast forward 25 years or 20 years. What's going to be your SMS, your text? What are you not going to know? And how do you create a habit so that anytime you hear a word you don't know, like AI, I mean, I hear all kinds of experts talking about AI that don't know what they're talking about, frankly. Are you going to have the self-discipline to go do the research to develop a point of view? Coming out of that room, everybody in the room realized they had an individual responsibility to learn new things to be productive leaders. All of us can turn off our lives right now and coast through the rest of life. Is a wasted life meandering through life without direction? Or is it having a purpose and constantly being humble enough to know you need to improve, but then constantly improving yourself? So when the day comes that you pass from this earth and you turn to your family, or someone turns to your family and says, did that person earn it? They say, yeah.
Did I earn it? I love it. You made reference to General Banks, who was the chairman of the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership at West Point there, your friend. He and I are actually writing a book together on momentum. Most of us who love sports can feel or sense momentum shifts. It's true in business too, in my opinion. Sometimes you have a moment that either helps propel you or even your opponent forward, something, a spark that changes things. Have you ever had a moment in your P&G career where a decision, a choice shifted momentum in your business?
Hmm. It's the leader's job to create momentum,
Mm.
to either create or stop momentum. My undergraduate degree is engineering. So I'm an engineer. I understand momentum. And basically the leaders got to control it because it's within the leader's control. John Kotter, professor at Harvard, wrote a book called Leading Change. And one of the key points of leading change, which I used at the VA and at P&G, was the importance of creating a guiding coalition, a small group of believers who can drive the change. But importantly, right after that is notching and publicizing some small wins. When I got to the VA, that was critically important because previous secretary had resigned. 45 veterans reported bad outcomes in Phoenix by not getting care. We had broken trust.
Mm.
And somehow I needed to rebuild trust. The only way to rebuild trust as a leader is to get out there publicly
Mm.
and be the face of the organization. It's easy to discredit an organization that is a monolithic bureaucracy. It's harder to discredit an organization that is Bob McDonald, West Point graduate, 82nd Airborne Division, P&G CEO, opening up their heart and saying, I'm here to use everything I've got, all the knowledge I've gained, all the experience I've gained to care for you. I care about you. Here's my phone number.
Mm.
That leads to trust. Trust comes from intimacy,
Mm.
and the leaders got to build that intimacy. And then you've got to develop these quick wins. We would outline on the wall all the steps of change we were going to take. And oftentimes we'd accelerate a small step before a bigger step because we needed the win that week.
Mm.
We tried to have a win every single week that both the organization and our customers, veterans, would see. That's how the leader controls momentum.
Wow, that is so powerful. And then as those small wins start to accumulate, people start to believe, as you said, and then the belief brings bigger wins along with it. So powerful. Bob, you've made several references to the idea of chapters of your life not being afraid of the next one. What's next for you? You're in this extraordinary place right now. What's next?
Well, I'm chairman of the board of the West Point Association of Graduates.
Mm.
So our 55,000 or so alumni. And I'm working very hard there to accomplish our mission of helping West Point alumni be the most connected alumni body in the world.
Wow.
And at the same time, serving the Long Gray Line by creating alumni support activities that graduates want, serving West Point by raising money, providing programs that enhance what the government spends. The government spends roughly 85% of the cost of graduating a cadet. We raise the other 15%, just like we talked about the McDonald Conference for Leaders of Character. And I also am the chairman of the fundraising campaign. We're in the midst of a fundraising campaign where we're raising $600 million to help the academy and to help the cadets and the graduates. And then I just took on a new role as chairman of the board of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. I feel very strongly about this.
Oh.
Senator Elizabeth Dole and her husband, Bob, were tremendous supporters of the military and military families. And Bob, when he went in the hospital, Walter Reed, Senator Elizabeth followed him and saw how poorly we care for military families and military spouses. She came back and developed the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, is all about caring for caregivers. And working together, she and I and others influenced Congress to pass laws to recognize we have to care for military families, not just the military veteran themselves. For example, a RAND study that we did in 2014, 5.5 million caregivers for 19 million veterans. That's roughly 1 in 4. Because you get blown up by an IED, you're not going to live a normal life after that. When I was secretary, we had more veterans living productive lives without arms and legs because you're 10 times more likely to survive the battlefield today than you were years ago. So Senator Dole now is older and was looking for some help and asked me if I would help her. And so I became chairman of the board. I'm thrilled to do it. And I'll tell you why, Don. So often in our country, the military is the canary in the coal mine. If you want to find out what's going to happen in US medicine 10 years from now, look at what's going on at the VA today. VA is responsible for most of the great inventions in American medicine: the shingles vaccine, the prosthetic devices, sensors in the brain, barcode to connect patients with medicine, first electronic medical record. Michael DeBakey, all his heart stuff, he was a VA doctor. Tom Starzl at the University of Pittsburgh was a VA doctor, first liver transplant. Why does it go to the VA? Because there's no scale. So if you come to me running the Procter & Gamble company, we want you to invest to eliminate Lou Gehrig's disease. Well, how many people get it?
Right.
The military led on segregation, a whole host of things. Well, we are approaching a caregiver crisis in this country. Many of us are taking care of our children as well as our parents. We've got to figure this out. And I think the military is our best chance to figure it out. Again, it's the in extremis situation, but it gives us the opportunity to figure it out so we can reapply it to the citizenry at large.
Mm.
There's something else I'm working on that I want to tell you about. Can I do that?
Please.
So I'm involved on the advisory board of something called Every Cure. The fellow who inspired me to join this effort is Dr. David Fajgenbaum at University of Pennsylvania. David was suffering from a terrible disease called Castleman's disease, and he is on his way to die. Obviously, being a doctor, he worked hard to figure out, is there anything at all I can take that will put this disease in remission? And he found a drug that had been developed for a different disease that saved his life.
Mm.
And he's alive today, beautiful wife, beautiful children. And he started this Every Cure. So what we're doing is we're taking all the drugs that have been cleared by the FDA and using artificial intelligence to test them against all the diseases that exist to see how many could be repurposed to stop a disease that it wasn't intended for.
That is so powerful.
It's one of the limitations of our medical system that we test drugs for specific use and no other, whereas the drug could be usable for other diseases. We're in the early days, but we've got a lot of help from the federal government, from companies like Johnson & Johnson, my dear friend Alex Gorski, former chairman, CEO of Johnson & Johnson, West Point graduate. And a lot of people are really excited about this. And oh my gosh, this would be huge.
The cure for cancer may be out there today.
Yes.
And we just don't know it because we were using it for something else. Well, I love that. What a great use of AI.
Exactly. We need a not-for-profit mechanism that can do this work, but we also need a not-for-profit mechanism that allows us to test all of these available drugs against all of the diseases that don't have drugs.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I would love to do, Bob, is put in the show notes here a link to contribute.
I'd be forever grateful.
Well, we are forever grateful to you. Thank you for stepping into it. And thank you today for the time you've given and for the willingness to be a corporate competitor. I love all that you do in so many ways, and it's an honor to call you friend.
Well, it's my honor to be with you, Don. I love calling you friend. Please call on me anytime.
I have your cell number.
You do. Yes, sir.
Okay. What a fantastic leader and what an incredible conversation. I gained so much. My first takeaway, the West Point cadet prayer, choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. It sounds good. What does it mean to choose the harder right? And he talked about the importance of a leader having to make those harder right choices every day. And it has to sometimes start in the simplest of ways. He used that analogy, which I thought was so powerful, when he talked about not walking by a piece of paper on the ground if it's there in an organization, wherever you are working, or not leaving the sink wet after washing your hands. How do you leave others? What is the message you're sending choose the harder right. It's easier to walk by. It's easier to say, we're not paying attention. But by doing that, setting a high bar, setting a great standard, you change the dynamic for others. My second great takeaway was when he talked about life being a series of chapters, of starting over moments. You study his career, and it is nothing but that. He managed to do that over and over again. And in each and every stop, he started not near the top, but he certainly ended up there because he was not afraid to start over. He was purposeful in everything he did. The third takeaway, I love that he gave out his phone number when he took over the job at BA, and that it's still the phone that he has today, and that he still takes phone calls today from veterans who are struggling because they have his number from the days that he gave it away. He wanted to set a really high standard for the organization and for himself. He wanted to let everyone he served, every one of those veterans, know that he cared. And how did he do it? He said, by the way, make me your last stop. If you're not getting what you need, let me help. So powerful. And what a great example of character-based leadership. Finally, his 5 E's that he taught those general managers at Procter & Gamble: envision, engage with your team, energize them, motivate them, enable them to be successful, and then make sure there's execution. None of it matters if you don't execute on the back end. Building that team along those 5 E's, you learn to love each other and recognize that you are, in fact, part of something big. Changes the way everyone shows up in what they're doing. I hope you'll go to the show notes. I hope you'll maybe weigh in on one of these opportunities that Bob is taking on to influence the world now in this next chapter of his life. I loved being with Bob McDonald today. I hope you did as well. I hope you gained as much as I did, and that you will leave today a greater corporate competitor. I appreciate you. Before we sign off, is there someone you would love to learn from as a guest on this show? Send me a LinkedIn message with your guest suggestion. It is even better if you're connected with them in some way. We'll do that interview, we'll learn from them, and we'll share the answers with you. Catch new episodes every Wednesday. Subscribe at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to be the first to get a chance to listen. And as a thank you gift, I will send you a chapter from one of my best-selling books. Stay connected with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My handle is @DonYaeger, DonYaeger. And until next week, I appreciate you.